When the prophet Amos walked down the main drag, it was like a shootout in the Old West. Everybody ran for cover. Special target was the beautiful people. And shooting from the hip, he never missed the mark. He pictures them sleek and tanned at Palm Beach, Acapulco, Saint-Tropez. They glisten with Bain de Soleil. A stereo is piped out over the marble terrace. Another tray of Bloody Marys is on the way, and a vacationing bishop plunges into the heated pool. With one eye cocked on them, and his other eye cocked on the unbeautiful people. The varicose veins of the old waiter, the pasty face of the starch-fed child, the winos passed out on the railroad siding, the ragged woman fumbling for food stamps at the checkout counter. When justice is finally done, Amos says, there will be hell to pay. The happy hour will be postponed indefinitely because the sun will never make it over the yardarm. The cashmere sweaters, the tangerine-colored slacks, the flowered lilies will all fade like the grass. Nothing but a few chicken bones will mark the place where once the cold buffet was spread out under the royal palms. But according to Amos, it won't be the shortage of food and fun that will hurt. It will be the shortage of hearing the words of the Lord. Toward the end, God will make himself so scarce, the world won't even know what it's starving to death for.
If you haven't picked up yet, what we're going to be talking about, what Amos is talking about, is justice. And justice is this theme that everybody seems to be cranking on today and talking about. But what we're going to do is we're going to go back to see what Amos has to say about it originally. And as justice was important then, it's important now. And what I want to do before the team leads us is I want to read to you from Amos. And these words make up what I think is the center of the book. And it's Amos chapter 5. Amos chapter 5, we're going to be looking, starting with verse 24. And here's what he says. But let justice roll on like a river, righteousness like a never-failing stream. Did you bring me sacrifices and offerings 40 years in the desert, O house of Israel? You have lifted up the shrine of your king, the pedestal of your idols, the star of your God, which you made for yourselves. Therefore, I will send you into exile beyond Damascus, says the Lord, whose name is God Almighty. So, let me let you know where he's going. Amos is going to be talking to all the countries around Israel before he lands on them. And what he says to them is utterly staggering. It's unsettling, but even in the midst of it, there's peace, and I think there's hope for us. So that's where we're going to go. So buckle your seatbelts, okay? Just understand that, and we're going to have a great time. Now, I want to segue from this. There's a theme that goes all the way through the book of Amos, talking about that God has his mission in this world, and this God that we serve is beyond anything that we can imagine. And it's so easy to take our religion and to make it about ourselves. And this song is going to flip all of that on its head and say, and ask, is he worthy?
Good morning, Lighthouse. Glad you guys are all here this morning. First thing, the children, all the masses of children can now go to Sunday school. Single file, let's not be chaotic here. Okay. And then also, I just wanted to remind you of a couple of, remind you of something, and then David, if you don't mind coming up and sharing a little bit about the missions fundraiser, we would deeply appreciate that. Okay, so the ladies should have received an email, but I just wanted to remind you that this Thursday we're starting a new study in our women's group. We're meeting online at 6 o'clock, and it's going to be amazing. We're doing the Francis Chan Letters to the Church book, and so if you need any more information on it, you can either talk to me or Heidi, who just went back to Sunday school after the service, and we can give you the 411 on that. But anyways, just wanted to get that on your radar. I believe it is a 10-week study. So I would encourage you to come for the 10 weeks, but if you can't, that's totally fine. But 6 o'clock on Thursdays. Okay, Dave, can you just come up really quick and... Thank you.
Hello, church. Wow, it seems a long time since I've been up here. But yeah, so as you know, we did a wonderful Easter basket fundraiser for missions. And yeah, bravo. And really, the love and the care and the collegiality of people coming forward in terms of not only just giving in terms of the idea of supporting the fundraiser, but giving in terms of time, talent, and treasure in terms of making the baskets. And so those baskets came together. They sold very well, over $600 worth of profits that will go to missions. And kind of using a buzzword, we're trying to becoming more self-sustaining. You know, again, we love the donations during the year, but we have to do our part too. And what I also loved was it made a beautiful presentation for Easter, which of course is a glorious day where we celebrate our Lord's resurrection. It's also a time for a reboot for the missions team. And so we had a wonderful reboot with Billy Kerr, and just did a fantastic job, a person that is with Pioneers, a mission organization, and I really just felt like we're going to be starting to just take off. So more to come. Stay tuned. Thank you so much. Thanks for blessing us.
Let's go ahead and start that slideshow. One of the bad parts about technology is, everything you read, right, Ben said, but it's as soon as someone takes a picture, it immediately shows up on your phone. And so I do something, Gene, you feel empathy for me on this, don't you? As soon as I sat down, I already got a picture on my phone with the crazy helmet on and everything. Can you believe that? Well, folks, as my Southwest flight banked over northern Missouri and western Iowa before it landed in Omaha, Nebraska, the pilot said, folks, look out your window. You'll see a sight that I hope you never see again. I looked out, and I was shattered. Now, if I was Adam, this is some of the dirt I would be made of. This is my territory. Those are my peeps down there. And what I saw was something that looked like the entire Pacific Ocean had leaked east. You saw the tops of houses and umbrellas from people's backyards and the carcasses of cows that looked like Holstein beach balls. And it was still going to be several months before the water would recede. Now, I find it funny because I live out here in California and I just didn't even take it seriously, and I didn't even really hear that much about the great flood of 2019. But it was very real there. And if you watched the news at night, what you heard was something like, and no one saw it coming. Is that really true? No one saw it coming? Humans have this ability to filter out warnings and not really pay attention to them, and then later on recast themselves as victims. Oh, I never saw it coming. I wish people would have warned me a little bit more. We do that a lot, I think. We've heard it recently with like all of the chaos around January 6th, that terrible event. And people said, and no one saw it coming. Really? I had even been warned by the guy who takes care of our financial investments, going, hey, I'm hearing amongst my friends that there is something coming on January 6th. I had heard that. Or global warming. Or, here's one. The warnings about what happens when 1% of a population has a wealth disproportionately above everybody else. We already know from history what happens. Or the warning about the pandemic. We were warned after the Ebola pandemic in other parts of the world. If you read the literature, we were warned. It's just we didn't pay very close attention to it. So what I think we really need are verdicts. Verdicts are much more powerful than warnings. Aren't they, Tim? Yeah. That when the foreman of the jury stands up and says, we, the jury, have found the defendant guilty, that's defining. Man. Or when your doctor goes, Mr. Evans, sit down, you're having a heart attack. That's a verdict. Or, I don't know, the Paradise Fire. When the Butte County Sheriff sent out, 25,000 robocalls and 5,400 emails and 5,800 texts, and they all conveyed one message that got everybody's attention. The fire's here, get out now. Verdicts are far more gripping, compelling than warnings. We pay attention to those. And I bring that up because verdicts are what make Amos so compelling. The book is about a 10-minute verdict. You can read the entire book in about 10 minutes. But I know that when we're talking about the Old Testament, for a lot of us, the Old Testament is just kind of fuzzy in our minds. Let me give you a sense of it. Here is a scene from that flood. Let me explain this. So the golden age of Israel was King Saul, King David, King Solomon. And that's right about 1,000 years before Christ. That gives you just a very short framework. After King Solomon, they're going to go through a civil war, like we went through a civil war. But they never got back together again. They divide into essentially two different countries. There's the north, that they retained the name Israel, made up of 10 tribes out of the 12 tribes. And then there's Judah, the two southern tribes. And they are going to live like that for hundreds of years until some terrible events happen. And that's what we find in the book of Amos. The northern tribes thought they were clever. They had negotiated with some of their enemies, some of their vicious ones, and thought that they had dodged a bullet. It was a little bit like when England tried to negotiate with Hitler. We know what happened with that, don't we? With the northern tribes of Israel, they negotiated. They went on with their lives. They ignored all of the warnings. They went on with their lives. They kept filling their homes with upscale furniture. The parking lots of IKEA and Costco and Trader Joe's were all full of their new shiny SUVs, and their refrigerators were full of, I don't know, artisan cheeses and gelato and craft beers. Life was good, right? Well, that's what we're going to find this morning. Because when Amos walks up the main street of town, I see him a little bit like this. He's mysterious. We know from his clothes and his outfit, we know from his outfit and when he talks that he's not from our parts. He's from across the border. There must have been a southern accent. And it was an event probably like a festival when everybody is in the main town for the big event. And on the dais is the king and the governors and the mayors, and maybe even Miss Israel is up on the dais. And they're waiting for the next speech. And all of a sudden, this guy walks out of the crowd and up to the mic. And when he speaks, no one saw it coming. Now, you would think that it would be a little bit like a church service. Have you been in one of these when some crank stands up and starts railing, and the pastor has to say, "Would the ushers please escort our friend from the building?" You would think that that would have happened here. It doesn't, because there must have been something so compelling about his words. His words cut like a serrated knife, and it was like no one could move a muscle while he's giving his verdict. And then all of a sudden, just as quickly as he came, he is gone like a ghost, like an apparition. And maybe he dropped his scroll in the dust because somehow people got their hands on it and kept it, and we have it today. That's the background. Now, I find Amos compelling because it is both a verdict and it's a warning. It was a verdict for Israel, but it's a warning for us. And you've heard me say this before. The Old Testament and books like this were not written to us, but they were written for us. So even across the centuries, there is something about this that still can speak to our hearts. And what we're going to see in this, it's going to feel like God is really, really angry. He is fierce. And that's hard for us because we like our God manageable and friendly and gracious and kind. But you can't read the book of Amos without going, oh my goodness. What must they have done to deserve a verdict like this? And if that could happen to them, is it possible that it could happen to us? And I understand that we're not Israel, right? We're not the chosen people of God. But haven't a lot of us felt like we are somehow special in God's sight? We have been on the receiving end of a lot of blessings, and to whom much is given, much is expected. But does that also begin to suggest that maybe we could be setting up ourselves as well? So that's why I asked this question. What made God so fierce here? What was going on? So I want to take you to this scene. And are you beginning to feel it a little bit? Do you want to borrow that helmet and that flak jacket so you can go, okay, we can handle it here? Now, before I jump in, let me say, spoiler alert, what makes God so angry is probably not what you think. It's going to be something different. So, let's go to the showdown. And let's start with this. So, can you picture it? He's standing there. You can tell he's not from our parts. He's even going to tell us that for a lot of the year, he's a fig picker. He follows the harvest, and the rest of the year, he's a shepherd to make ends meet. He's not a professional. The Lord roars from Zion and thunders from Jerusalem. The pastures of the shepherds dry up, and the top of Carmel withers. You think he's got their attention? Yeah, I think so. I'd be paying attention to that if there's no introduction. It's no, oh, it's nice to have our guest here today. It is just boom, right between the eyes. And then what he does is that he breaks immediately into one of his prophecies. And it's a prophecy that there's just a poetic riff to it that is gripping, and it's what he's going to be known for through time. Let me read it. It's not originally to Israel itself, but it's part of the whole design. Here's how it starts. This is what the Lord says. For 3 sins of Damascus, even for 4. And that's going to be the motif that he uses, for 3 sins and then for 4. I will not relent, because she threshed Gilead with sledges, having iron teeth. I will send fire on the house of Hazael that will consume the fortresses of Ben-Hadad. I will break down the gate of Damascus. I will destroy the king who is in the valley of Aven, and the one who holds the scepter of Beth-Aden. The people of Aram will go into exile to Kir, says the Lord. And there's a grittiness. There's gravel in his throat. And I'm sure that some of the guys in the audience were going, woohoo! God's going to carry out judgment against our enemies. Until they kept listening. And what happens is this amazing thing where it's like Amos goes back and forth around the neighbors of Israel, bringing a condemnation like this. And they think they're getting off scot-free until they realize that what he's done is that he has crisscrossed them and cinched them in like the tongue of your shoe that gets tightened to the point where it can't move. Israel now is in the center of the bullseye. For 3 sins and more. And that's just chapter 2. You get into chapters 3, 4, and 5, you've got oracles where God essentially says, Israel, yes, you are going to cease to exist as a country, as a people. What you have counted on, what you felt so confident of, it's going to be gone, and everything that you see will be kidnapped away, will dissolve, will disappear, and your generations will never know what it felt like to have a home. Oh my goodness. What would cause a loving God to feel such ferocity? Well, excuse me. Let's start with the low-hanging fruit. He says, in essence, there were 3 things that started things off. Number 1 is amusing ourselves to death with just stuff that doesn't count. Another is spiritual complacency, where we're not willing to put our ego and our agendas under God's microscope. We just kind of go through life. The third one is, he says, you have remodeled faith into kind of like comfy homes for yourself. Instead of a real, authentic, vibrant, responsible faith before God, you've turned it into something that, well, it's all about your own lives and about your prayers just for your own needs. You've forgotten me. These are not the actual offenses. This is like the kids' game. You're getting warmer. You're getting warmer. You're getting warmer. Each one of these lets us know that there is increasing heat coming. So back to the question. what is it that made this God so stirred up in his emotions that it persuades him to completely stand back and let the Assyrians decimate the 10 tribes? So till this day, we do not know what happened to the 10 tribes. With Ancestry.com and all those genealogies, it looks like some of them, and this is what the Assyrians did, some of them were sent into Africa, some into India and China, some further north. They were cast to the four winds. That's the seriousness of this. And of course, if you're in that audience, you go, what is going on? And what did we miss? And if we're listening to this as a warning, we have to be saying, okay, what is there in this that we need to be paying attention to? And this is where I want to take you to that middle verse again. But let justice roll on like a river, righteousness like a never-failing stream. Now, we're going to dig into what this idea of justice means in a few weeks, a little bit more in a few weeks. But the word justice in Hebrew is the word MISHPAT. And it means to give people their due. To give people their due. Whether punishment for crimes, whether provisions, or whether protection. That's justice. And it's used 200 times in the Old Testament. 200 times. All about God's mishpat. And there is something that is deep in his character that longs to see justice rolled down a hill like gravity or like a spring of water flowing out to the nations. This is something that I've brought up before. God's mission as a God is revealed in Genesis 12, where God says to Abraham, Abraham, I'm going to bless you that you would be a blessing to the nations. I'm going to raise up a people who will be my billboard, my ambassadors, my docents for the rest of the world to look at, to understand my heart, because I want the nations blessed. You aren't chosen as a nation for yourself. You're chosen to be my partner, carrying out my message, displaying my glory so that all the nations would be on the receiving end. That's what God wanted. That is his mission. And justice was part of that the Jews were to display the justice heart of God for the people, to implement that. So all the peoples of the earth would be on the receiving end. In Leviticus 24, let's see, do I have, yeah, I think I did. Look at this verse. Have the same mishpat, justice, for the foreigners who live among you as for the native born. The understanding is that you, as my people, you need to be different than all the other nations of the earth. You need to have a protective justice for them as well. Now, as this was lived out, it got a finer point to it. And Zechariah chapter 7, verses 10 and 11 talks about this a little bit more. He says, treat one another justly, mishpat, love your neighbors, be compassionate with each other. Don't take advantage of widows, orphans, visitors, that means aliens, and the poor. Don't plot and scheme against one another. That's evil. Oh, I took this from the Message because I think it reads a little bit more smoothly. But it is this idea that there is a vulnerable quartet of people, widows, orphans, prisoners, and aliens, that if anybody is to be on the receiving end of mishpat, it is this group. And if you belong to me, you need to go way, way up and above the call of duty and provide justice for them. Why is God angry? Because his mishpat, his justice, was withheld. If you read on in the book of Amos, what he says is that you not only haven't implemented my justice, you haven't been neutral, you've embezzled my justice. You've used it for yourself, and what you've done is that you've created glass walls to protect yourself from caring especially for the most vulnerable in your lives. Okay, are you beginning to pick it up? That's why God is so fierce, is that the nation of Israel has gotten richer and more self-satisfied and more numbed with everything that they have, and they have turned their back on the very people who have a special place in the heart of God. That's what has stirred God's anger. You see, we tend to think that what really stirs God's anger are the sins that are like neon lights or like the red-blooded daffy sins of Vegas. This is what we see stirs God up. That's how deeply he cares. Whew. Like I said, this was not written to us. It was written for us. We are not the nation of Israel. We are not a theocracy. But still, we feel like as a nation we have been uniquely blessed of God, and to whom much is given, much is expected. Right? So to what degree are we opening up ourselves as a people if justice doesn't reign in our lives? Now, that's a big question. And we could get stuck in all sorts of different directions on that, because now we're hearing about social justice warriors and identity politics. And yeah, I've got some opinions on that, and we'll come to it later on. But I think that the solution may be a little bit easier than you think. We come to the New Testament, and one of the leaders of the New Testament is the half-brother of Jesus, James. And he even alludes to that quartet of the vulnerable in his letter. He says, true religion before God is to care for widows and orphans in their distress, and to keep oneself unstained by the world. Isn't that interesting? That in all of my years of being interviewed for jobs in churches, no one asked me, how do you do it caring for widows and orphans? I didn't even come up. Yet James uses it as one of his primary criteria for what the body of Christ should be. And folks, just to let you know where I'm going with all of this is that I feel like as a country, as a world, as we're beginning to slowly come out of this pandemic, it gives us a chance to come back and say, okay, let's align around the right things. What you see in Acts chapter 6 is, what did they do? They made sure that the widows were taken care of profoundly. So much so that the first leaders of the church were not the elders. They were the deacons. And the role of the deacons was not making sure that the lights stayed on, which I'm glad that our lights are on, or the accounting of money. The role of the deacons was to make sure that amongst themselves, at least, we were living with mishpat. We were taking care of each other. We were alleviating misery in the lives of those under our umbrella. So, I like this. Depending upon which translation you read, it's the phrase, let justice roll. It can either be justice rolling downhill or justice like a river rolling. What does this need to look like for a church family? I think this. The early church doesn't seem to have a sense that it rested upon them to provide justice for the entire society. The church in Jerusalem wasn't trying to take care of all of the widows in Jerusalem. They were trying to take care of their widows, their orphans, their prisoners first, and then allow that justice to trickle down to the rest of society. I believe that it is marvelous if God has given you gifts and a calling to take care of immigrants in a big way outside the church, or to take care of widows in a big way, in a global way outside the church. What I want to say is we need to be living out God's mishpat very well in our life together as a church first, so that people, we together, we are caring well, and people look on and go, oh, look at how they care for each other. It is a reflection of the character of their Savior, the character of their God. We do that first. And I guess I want to be very candid here. I feel like we don't do that very well in the past 30 or 40 years. I think we look to larger organizations outside, and we have to say, no, we're going to make sure that Mishpat takes care amongst us here first. And I want to give you a new way of thinking about it. I still believe that the vulnerable quartet, we've always got to be thinking about those folks among us who generally fit into that. But I want to enlarge it a little bit to this Greek word, OIKOS. It's a word that means household. Each one of us has those who live under our roof, but we also have a little bit wider range of relationships. Maybe they're not part of my immediate family, but I'm still called to watch out for them, care for them. I think of my handyman, Mr. Augusto. He's not part of my actual family. But if I find out that his family is going through it, he kind of lives under my umbrella a little bit. And I, as a follower of Christ, have a responsibility for those immediately within my own family, but in those of my web of relationships outside. Not everybody, of course not. We can't take care of everyone, but there are certain people that God has brought into our lives. They may not share our faith, but they're still kind of part of our household, still kind of part of our oikos. Thinking like this helps us from just only taking care of ourselves, and we hunker down into our church and we make sure we're okay. Yeah. But we always need to be using the oikos as a framework for thinking wider. So who are the people who are under your umbrella? They're part of your oikos. It may be your neighbors. It may be your relatives. It may be close friends inside your church. But what I want to really drive home this point is that God's people, we care well for each other, very well for each other inside the church and in those nearby webs of relationship. And if you looked at the website, I describe Mishpat this way. None of us is hungry. None of us is alone. None of us lacks work. And none of us pursues justice alone. This is my best definition of what I think that the Bible teaches us that real justice looks like. That we take care of those for our church family a smallish church family like this, but also in the nearby webs of relationships that you have. Some of those are going to be believers, some of those won't be believers, but we're caring for wider than ourselves. Now, what I want to do is what I did last week. I've thrown out some new ideas. I want to create some time for Q&A. So, where did that microphone go? There it is. So, I know you may not have any questions or you may have comments, but I want to turn this into something more than just a sermon. Because I do believe, I'm convinced of this, that as churches move on into the future, we are going to get to live out the justice of God in new ways. And living for God's mishpat needs to be something that we talk about, we understand, we make sure it happens. So, thoughts, questions? You can certainly disagree with me. Yes? Are you going to be Phil Donahue for me? Thank you. And then I'll repeat. If you don't pick up his questions, I'll repeat them.
I'm going to go a slightly different direction.
Okay?
When I think of charity, charity to me is giving of ourselves, of our money. Sometimes we do more, sometimes we do less. There are other people that think of charity as what the government does. And that to me is where we sometimes make a mistake. Somebody else will take care of them. I'm paying my taxes, so let them do that. And that's kind of where when I talk to people, I try to explain genuine charity is not using other people's money. It is what you're doing yourself.
Okay. Let me see. I don't know that I would disagree with you on that. I don't know that mishpat, justice, in the Old Testament sense, really made distinctions like it because they didn't have a sense where governments ever took care of people. So their situation was so different. But here's something that I would agree with you, that when you have the development of the social systems in our society, it made kind of a safety net under people. What I believe that you saw was that churches began to see that they were less responsible for each other. And as the needs get greater, as there's more chaos with pandemics and things like that, it is encouraging us as a group of people to come back as Christ followers and make sure that justice exists in our society, especially when we're watching politics become more polarized. We need to kind of live above that. Bruce, you had a comment?
I did have a comment. So I'm an acolyte of Father Greg Boyle, and he runs a gang ministry in L.A. called Homeboy Industries. But he has a concept, and it touched me deeply, and he calls it kinship. And his definition of kinship is we draw a circle around us, and no one is left outside the circle. So, this touched me, and that touched me. And when I became a Christian 20 years ago, what touched me was there's nothing that you can say or do that can make God love you more than he already loves you. And I think it's all tied together with God's love. And we are called to love others and to draw a circle around ourselves and leave no one outside the circle. And I loved your concept, your talk today. Thank you.
Oh, you're next.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm glad that you mentioned widows. and also that includes widowers, because that's the bulk of the people in my bereavement groups. And if you could hear the anguish and the isolation, and this really started before COVID, but now it's just hugely just magnified. And often I hear that when we talk about support, that they reached out to their church and their church didn't help them out, or they didn't hear back from the pastor. And so we're really working in kind of new territory in terms of like providing not only in terms of emotional and spiritual support, but also even just checklists of what to do. Because we've come from a society where we used to help out and look out for that, and that's just gone.
I have a follow-up question for you, David. You lived outside the United States for how many years?
15.
15 years. Did you see, and I may be just fishing here, but did you see a difference in what church life looked like when you left and when you got back?
Oh, to hear? Oh, yeah. And I've always, and I've shared this with others in the congregation, I always felt there was a big change when the churches in the U.S. went to kind of the focus on worship and presentation. And I even saw that happening when I left Puerto Rico, that we would have a ministry group, and I'd talk about going to the emergency room or what we were doing with and also in terms of our community. And some of the pastors hadn't even been to an emergency room. So yeah, but U.S.-wise, I'd say the shift occurred with the presentation type of style that many of the churches went into.
That's fascinating. Rick, you had a... No, I don't think you forgot.
Yeah, well, when you're speaking on the subject, the first thing it brought to mind, I'm 73 years old. It takes me back, immediately started going back to, like 6, 8 years old, being raised in a small church, about like this. And a lot of this happens here in this church. I see it. I see things standing up on my front porch. We get phone calls. I got this, I got that. John will oftentimes be in the parking lot handing out produce, and there's a lot of that happens in this small body. And back when I was a kid, the farmers would come in and they had extra this and that, and people just knew, because they were close and tight knit enough to know who was in need. And it wasn't about, it was just about sharing. And everybody, some had some things, some had others, and it kind of just went around. And I see a lot of that in the small bodies. I don't see it so much in the large churches. People, you get in the larger churches now, and we've been involved with those too. Then you got the food pantries, and that's great, and that's all good, but it's not such of a personal touch. People are seem to miss out, and that's the way it seems to me. Seem to miss out on that personal touch, that like you say, that circle of your peeps, that you look over and take care of and watch out for. And so some of that is definitely missing. I think small bodies are more in touch with the sharing and the family structure type of giving. But and I think we do a good job of that at this church.
What's interesting, Rick, is that when churches get truly good at that, they become irresistible. They grow. And when they grow, what happens is that some of the people still get that same kind of care. New people coming in can't break in, and so they go, well, it's not loving and caring for me. And that's kind of what was going on in the book of Acts, where they were taking care of one set of widows, and another set of widows were going, yeah, it's not working for me. I'm not getting any care. And that's where then they made the selection of 6 deacons to make sure that everyone, no one got left out, that care was all the way through the entire congregation. And that kind of goes, I think, to my point that as we look towards the future, we have to be thinking in terms of people who have their eyes on that for the entire congregation. So new people, older people, people who've been there a long time, everyone receives that kind of justice in their lives.
Absolutely. And, I've caught myself, and I found myself guilty of being a part of those as well. We're the old timers. Here's what we were doing before. We did this back when, and the newcomers are on the outside.
Mm-hmm. And they can't break in.
And yeah, so I feel that. I've been guilty
Sure.
of that, and I strive very hard to not vocalize that. Here's what we used to do, or here's back when it was the founding folks, whatever.
Yep.
Because everybody is a part of the body.
I think you're spot on.
Yeah.
Team, come on up. We're going to have you lead us in another couple songs, but I don't want to cut anybody off. These are interesting conversations. I don't want to cut anybody off. But does the idea make sense to you that you have a larger umbrella than you think? And you've got people that God has put in your life. Some are believers here at the church. Some are believers other places. Some may not be people of faith at all, but they're still kind of under your umbrella. And I want you to think, okay, how can I offer God's mishpat to those people? And we can all do it. This is something all of us can do. But it does mean you thinking through, okay, so who's under my umbrella? Maybe even pulling out a piece of paper and writing down their names to make it a little bit more concrete. And in your mind, you say, no, I'm going to own them as some of my peeps. I'm going to make sure that, like I said, none of them is ever hungry. None of them is alone. None of them lacks work. I can't find them a job, but maybe I can pray with them. Maybe I can check with my friends. And none of them pursues justice alone. And that may mean, let's say that they're a veteran and they don't know how to navigate the medical system for the VA. And maybe you just go and sit with them as they're trying to get their appointments. Maybe they don't know how to navigate technology on their computers. And they need you to just walk with them through it. So, mishpat, justice. And isn't it fascinating? At the very center of the emotional heart of God is love. That whatever God is, love and justice and empathy are at the very center. And he invites us. Now unto him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine. To him who is at work in the church and through the church's people and through the church's community with each other, now and forevermore. And God's people together said, Amen. Amen. Go in his grace and his joy today, brothers and sisters. Have a great day.